Chapter 10. Traces. Mau Mau still hasn't come back. That was the gist of the letter that had arrived for Jinshi the night before. It had been worded more elaborately than that. Formality demanded as much, but there had been an unmistakable urgency to the handwriting. He assumed the writer had been the Jade Pavilion's chief lady-in-waiting, meaning she must have been frazzled indeed. This was the woman whom his own nursemaid Suiren had praised as highly capable after doing a stint at the Jade Pavilion when Jinshi took Mau Mau back for a while. To be perfectly honest, Jinshi thought the girl would be fine on her own for a night. She slipped out from time to time. He'd witnessed it himself more than once, but she was usually back by morning, which was why he found this entire thing surprising. When he arrived at the Jade Pavilion, the longer-serving ladies-in-waiting watched him apprehensively. They were going through the motions, but they seemed distracted. The newer girls, however, were working industriously. He entered the living room to find Consort Gyokyo reclining on a generous couch. Princess Lingli was playing in another room. The chief lady-in-waiting, Hongyang, was there, her face set. Gyokyo held a folding fan in front of her mouth, though she looked more or less as she usually did. "You look well, milady," Jinshi said. "Hardly," Gyokyo replied, making clear that she was not going to waste any time on formalities. Evidently, she was less phlegmatic about the situation than she appeared. "I thought you must have absconded with her again, but it seems I was wrong about that at least. Honestly, milady, have I ever done anything so rude?" The truth was, Jinshi shared her disquiet. "I wonder if she's gone and stuck her nose into some new dangerous goings-on," Gyokyo said. "Do we know what she was doing?" "Yes, until noon the day before yesterday," Hongyang broke in. She explained that Mau Mau had gone to the medical office to prepare the mugwort for the moxibustion. Luomin had explained about his list of health-related provisions for the rear palace, and said Mau Mau had been very much in favor of the idea. "So perhaps she went to the Institute for Practical Studies," Luomin had said, and the old eunuch who ran the place confirmed that Mau Mau had in fact been there. But after that, it was as if she had vanished. She had gone to get the mugwort, then proceeded to the school. Where had she gone after that? "I can only think she was caught up in something," Hongyang said. She looked calm enough, but there was a hint of distress in her manner, and an evident desire to defend Mau Mau. "I checked the most suspicious places, but there was nothing." And Hongyang was, after all, Gyokyo's serving woman. She couldn't go making a commotion on her own. She had to rely on Jinshi. Jinshi crossed his arms and grunted. It was hard to imagine anything that would inspire Mau Mau to disappear of her own accord. She could be brisk at times, but she understood her place. Likewise, she had a way of underestimating her own value, but she certainly knew that simply leaving her mistress without permission would bring down punishment. There was either some specific circumstance preventing her from coming home, or else she had simply been rendered incapable of returning. It was the worst thing he could think of. "Do you suppose anyone had some kind of grudge against her?" Gyokyo inquired. With more than 2,000 women and 1,000 eunuchs at the rear palace, there were bound to be one or two people a person didn't get along with, and sometimes such differences could conceivably spill over into actual harm. "Grudges? Against her? Plenty, I assume," Hongyang said. They all fell silent. The fact that no one could deny it was unsettling. Some of the women of the Crystal Pavilion, particularly, probably had it out for Mau Mau. "Mau Mau wouldn't be able to resist physical force," Gyokyo said. The young lady was quite well versed in poisons, but she was small and not physically strong. "If a whole group attacked her, she'd be dead." "Yes, that's true," Gaoshin said, his brow furrowing, "but I somehow doubt she would travel to the next life alone." They all fell silent again. Everyone in the room knew Mau Mau well enough to know that even in the face of physical violence, she wouldn't go quietly. She would set that mind of hers working and find some way to take at least one of her attackers with her. At present, however, there is no discernible reason for her disappearance, and that means she will have to be punished, Jinshi said. Mau Mau was frequently granted special treatment, but unfortunately, they had to draw the line somewhere. "Having said that," he continued, "before we can punish her, we must find her." The best thing, he decided, would be to retrace her steps once more. When they arrived at the medical office, the doctor with the thin mustache welcomed them with tea, but he seemed depressed. Luomin was writing something calmly. When Jinshi and his group showed up, he came over to greet them, dragging one leg. "You must be here about Mau Mau." Luomin was quite perceptive. They seemed more likely to get useful information out of him than from the moping doctor. "I'd like you to tell your story again," Jinshi said. "Of course," Luomin said, and proceeded to outline the events simply but clearly. Unfortunately, it yielded no information Jinchi hadn't heard at the Jade Pavilion. Is that everything? It is, sir. Jinchi was beginning to get irritated. Gaoshun alerted him with a nudge that he was tapping his foot noisily. Knowing he had to do something, Jinchi looked around the medical office. What about the other Mau Mau? Isn't the cat here today? I believe she's out on a walk. It was, for some reason, Gaoshun who answered, sounding dispirited. Jinchi was aware that his attendant had been quietly bringing a fish along each time they came to the rear palace recently. Jinchi had thought petting that furball might help him feel a little better. Of all times for her not to be here. Usually this is about when she comes around to beg for food, the doctor said. True, she is a little late, the woman agreed. The two of them looked at each other. Come to think of it, when the young lady left here, Mau Mau was practically plastered to her, the doctor said, stroking his chin. That, at least, was new information, though not of great consequence. Of course cats would play around with whoever was there. The woman, though, said, Is that how she looked to you? Good question. She was sticking awfully close, not really playing around. That was just when you went to use the restroom, woman. The young lady said something about the consort sleeping lightly. Woman didn't say anything, but went over to the medicine cabinet and gazed at its panoply of drawers. At length, he opened one and placed some dried berries on a piece of wrapping paper. Did she happen to take any of these with her? I'm sorry to say I don't remember, the doctor confessed. He looked into the drawer. I do feel like there used to be more of them in there. Maybe she did take some. The woman nodded, then turned to Jichi. Forgive me, but might I be permitted to go look for our kitten? Then, still looking supremely calm, he added, It might afford us the chance to find the other Mau Mau as well. Evidently, he had some kind of idea. In that, Jinchi reflected, Mau Mau and her adoptive father very much resembled each other. And what purpose will finding this cat serve? It may serve no purpose at all. We'll have to see, the woman said. He walked along, dragging his leg. His kneecap had been removed when he had been banished from the rear palace. Punishment for the death of the heir to the throne, the current emperor's firstborn son. Children, it must be noted, died all the time. To be mutilated and banished for such an occurrence could only be attributed to Luomen's bad luck. Now the eunuch studied the strange berries in his hand, the herbal medicine he'd taken from the medicine cabinet. This is a good specimen, he commented. Still fresh. The aroma is still strong. He looked around. Gaoshun was walking behind Jinchi, carrying a fish. He occasionally offered a quiet, meow, but Jinchi pretended not to hear him. If Basen had seen his father this way, the blood would have drained from his face. Gaoshun did everything he could to play the serious father in front of his son. The other eunuchs split up to look for the cat. Cats' territories typically aren't that large, the woman said. An animal wasn't likely to roam more than half a li, individual variations aside, of course. They might range a little farther when in heat, but our kitten is still young enough that we may not have to worry about that. However, he was interrupted by a voice from behind. Master Jinchi, we found her, one of the eunuchs said. They followed him. They were in the northern quarter of the rear palace, but parts of the area were separated from the southern quarter by only a single wall, which had holes small enough for a kitten to sneak through. The animal, he'd been informed, had originally been found not far from the wall. When they got to the kitten, she was rolling back and forth on the ground, stretched out pathetically by the roots of the tree. The roots showed signs that she'd scratched at them, and some small berries lay on the ground beside her. Jinchi crouched down and scratched Mau Mau under the chin. She squinted with pleasure, then turned over and went to sleep. So she's been sleeping? Jinchi asked. It looked almost as if she was drunk. Look at these, the woman said, picking up some of the berries. They resembled the medicine he'd brought along. He looked at them closely, then studied the scratch marks on the tree. There was another berry inside the hollow of the tree, and when he reached inside, he came up with a scrap of paper. Mau Mau must have done this, he said. He opened the scrap of paper, but there was nothing written on it. Yes, but what was she trying to tell us? Jinchi said archly. We'll have to go back to the medical office to find out, the woman replied, and then he bent down, scooped up Mau Mau, and started walking. One thing Mau Mau and Luomen had in common was that you never knew what they were going to do next. They both seemed to believe that showing was better than telling, or at least better than explaining in advance what they had in mind. Demonstration was the quickest way for the intelligent to explain something to the less gifted. This is catnip, the woman was saying. It's a feline favorite and induces a state much like drunkenness. You can make a tea with it that protects against chills and encourages good sleep. Mao Mao must have intended it for Consort Gyokyo. Then, when she'd suddenly found herself in dire straits, she'd put it to good use. The chances that they would find it hadn't been very good. Maybe no one would notice the stuff. But here it was, a message left by Mao Mao. Perhaps she'd relied on the likelihood that Luomin would figure it out. The others were starting to see why she admired him so much. Now Luomin took out the piece of paper. Surely it must have some significance, even though there was nothing written on it. "This is a little game she always used to love," Luomin said. He lit a candle from the asbestos-wrapped flint, the room filling with a rich aroma of honey. He took the paper and singed it slightly, whereupon letters appeared on it. The flame quickly became very eager, and Luomin jerked the page away from the fire. "If you write on a piece of paper using fruit juice or tea, the letters are slightly more flammable than the paper, so they appear when the surface is passed over the flame. On this occasion, it would appear she used alcohol." "Ah, yes, she did take some of our distilled spirits with her," the doctor piped up. It would have been nice of him to mention that sooner. In any case, that meant that the writing caught fire first, making it visible. And as for the message, they can now see... "Is that the character for small shrine?" the doctor said. "It's too messy to read. I think you let it burn too much." "My apologies," the woman said, though it hadn't really been under his control. The paper contained just 2 characters, the one for roadside shrine, and one more. Presumably, that was all Mao Mao had been able to dash off in the moments she'd had available to her. At least this strengthened the speculation that she'd been prevented from coming back to the Jade Pavilion against her will. And this abstruse trick had been the best thing she could manage to let them know what was going on. "Are there any shrines in that area?" the woman inquired. "We're going to find out," Jinshi said. The Shrine of Choosing was only the start. The northern quarter was dotted with old buildings. There could very well be a shrine or 2 there, but even Jinshi, who'd been in and around the rear palace for years, couldn't be sure. Then there was the other character on the piece of paper, tantalizingly almost legible. It was a bit of a shapeless blob. Perhaps Mao Mao had tried to use a simplified form to save time. It didn't help that whatever she had written had been partially blackened by the flame. "What could it be?" Jinshi muttered. "I'm afraid I haven't the slightest," the doctor said. Maybe they should try the Jade Pavilion. Gyokyo or the others might be able to shed some light on it. "I don't know how much hope we can hold out, though," Jinshi said. "I wonder." Luomin blew out the candle and calmly put it away. He seemed unhurried, in contrast to the fidgety, anxious doctor. "Are you not worried about her?" Jinshi asked. Could Luomin, despite his gentle appearance, actually have a heart of stone? "Worried? I am. But I will simply do what I can do. I wouldn't want the tasks I must attend to suffer because I was in a tizzy." He began taking out some medicines. "Besides, I once went an entire year without a word from her." Jinshi was quiet. Luomin must have meant the year after his daughter had been taken by the lady hunters. What could Jinshi do in the face of such a remark but keep his peace? He thought back to when Mao Mao had been a maid, working away, unable to communicate with the pleasure district. It made him realize that father and daughter did share some strange commonalities. He could see that even without Mao Mao here, he needn't worry about Consort Gyokyo. If she wanted a food taster, he was prepared to offer Suiren again. He imagined there was a good chance that the Jade Pavilion's ladies would reject that idea, however. Hongyang herself had looked practically terrified. Jinshi left the medical office, moving quicker than usual as he made for Gyokyo's residence. "Master Jinshi." Gaoshun was looking at him sourly. "I know." He slowed down to a regal walk, greeting the occasional smiles from the women who passed by with graciousness. The perfect noble. "Sloppy writing," Hongyang remarked, scrunching up her brow. "I could say more like written hurriedly, without the time for careful calligraphy. The scorches don't help, but the characters themselves are a bit blobby." This cool assessment came from Gyokyo. Princess Lingli was by her feet, playing with wooden blocks. The consort grumbled. "I wonder what it could say." "I think it looks a little like the character for Wings." No, the bottom half of the character isn't crowded enough for that." "Yes, but Mao Mao's writing has always had a certain peculiar charm." "Well, then maybe a fresh set of eyes, or 3, could help to decipher the writing." Hongyang promptly summoned the other ladies in waiting. However, even Yinghua, Guiyuan, and Ailan weren't able to agree on what they were seeing. "Oh, I think it says next." That's close, but I don't quite think so." Yeah, I feel like there's more to it than that. Then the lady-in-waiting with a white hairband spoke up. It looks like wings, or next, to me too. I agree with my sister, said the woman with a black hairband. The last of them, the girl with a red hairband, was staring at the paper as if her gaze might burn a hole right through it. Don't you think this says jade? She asked. That character certainly did look that way, a bit like a cross between the ones for wings and next. See here? It's a little swoopier than usual. Normally this stroke would be straight down. Yes, I could see it. But what do you suppose it means? Yokio said. Is it a reference to the Jade Pavilion? The debate started immediately. Maybe, but what would be the point of referring to this place? Meanwhile, Sekiyu was scrunching up her nose. Shisui? She said suddenly. Everyone stopped and looked at her. She shivered under their collective gaze. What's that? It's a name? The name of a maid who was with Mao Mao. It wasn't a particularly unusual name. It was frequently written with characters meaning purple and jade, or otherwise offspring and jade. It could be the name of practically anybody in the rear palace. But Jinshi remembered someone else in connection with that character, Sui. I believe there was a girl called Xiaolon who was often with them, he said. He'd seen them together before, a palace woman with the aspect of a friendly squirrel, much as he was surprised to realize Mao Mao was actually friends with some other girls. Find that serving woman, he commanded his eunuchs. They immediately left the room. Master Jinshi, Gaoshan said. Suddenly, Jinshi realized his face was hard set, his fists clenched so tightly that his nails were leaving impressions in his palms. He tried to put his mask back on, but without much success. Sometime later, a shrine was discovered near where they'd found the kitten. A dilapidated construct tucked in the shadow of a storehouse. It might have remained hidden forever if no one had been specifically looking for it. The shrine, it turned out, was the entrance to a tunnel. A passage constructed out of one of the old, unused waterways. They learned one more thing as well. There were no women registered in the rear palace with the name Sekiyu had come up with. Shisui was nowhere to be found, and one of the new eunuchs was missing too.